Welcome back to the next video. This is video 23 and this time we are dealing with our block entries and we are paginating through them, and we have two endpoints here. One where we index all our block entries and return like a pagination object where we can go through all this in a paginated way, and the second endpoint that we are making here is indexByUser, so we are querying all the block entries that are made by a specific user, and then we also paginate through them. Our video structure is as always: first we have a look at our video outcome, then we write a user story for this, or read the user story, and then we implement it and close it. So let's have a quick look at our outcome. So you can see we have here our getting all the block entries endpoint, and if we hit this, you see we're not just getting returned as an array all the block entries, but we get like a pagination object here, which has our block entry items, of course with a relation to our author. And you can see here at the moment we are having like 3 items in our block entry table. And you see we have one from the author with the ID 7 and 2 with ID 9 and 9. So there we have 2 block entries for the user 9. And then we have some metadata here, like total items for this query, the item count on this page, items per page, which could be on this page, this could be 10, like how many pages are there in total. Of course 1 if we just have 3 items, and current page also 1. And then we have some links to the first page and to the last page. And if you would navigate through this, then you would also have previous or next, but since we are just having 3 objects here, it doesn't make any sense. And then we are having another get all block entries by user ID, so then we have the same endpoint here, and then we have here the user, and then we provide a query parameter, a normal parameter, sorry. And if you hit send here, then we are going against the query, checking all the block entries where the user has the ID 7, and so this is just one item that is returned. We have the correct metadata and links. If we go for the user with the ID 9, then we are getting returned the 2 block entries that are made by the author with the ID 9. You see also the links are updated correctly. They have the user here, the ID of the user here, and then the limit and the page. Let's have a short look at our story. Here we are in video 23, and we want to paginate our block entries, and we want to paginate all, and we want to also be able to paginate by user ID, so that we want to find all block entries that are in our database, and that we want to find all block entries that are by a specific user. So the story is, as a technical lead, I want to be able to query the API for all block entries and for all block entries by a user. These should be paginating endpoints for efficiency and for front-end implementation purposes. So why do we need paginating endpoints? Because if we have multiple users later and everyone is adding like 10 block entries a day, and then you query for all block entries, then you might get returned thousands, whatever, and this would be a very large request, and that couldn't be handled by a front end. So the acceptance criteria are: we want a simple get endpoint that should return all block entries, another get endpoint with parameter for our user ID. So if we provide here a user ID, then we want to query our database for the block entries that are related to this user. So for the author, then we can query in a where clause with SQL for the ID. And then we are getting just returned all the block entries by user, and these are also paginated. Here, and as it says, both should return pageable item with relation for author. So we want in our response object from our API server, we want inside our block entry have the relation for our author, so the author, the username, the email, whatever. We want to rename our endpoint from blocks to block entries, because right now it's named blocks, but we want to name it block entries, so it's the same naming schema as we are naming our entity, or we named our entity. And at last we want to add our request to our Postman collection. So now we can move this to doing and go into our code. So as you see here, we are on develop and everything is clean. So we can just use git-flow to switch to our feature branch, and so we can say git-flow feature start video 20, my mistake, git-flow feature start video 23, because as you see we are in video 23, and then we have a new feature branch based on develop. We can start developing. So at first it's like very simple. We have here our block, we have our controller, and right now the endpoint is for blocks, and you can see if we hit or if we start our server and we go into Postman and then we go for our localhost 3000 and query blocks, then we go into this get request here and we should return all block entries. And you see here we have like 3 block entries in the database right now, and they have the alpha 7 and another one has the alpha 9 and another 9, and right now we are returning all and we are not returning anything pageable. So the first thing that we want to do, we want to rename this to block entries. So if you query this here, you don't get anything, but you have to change this up to block entries. It's working. So we can go to this request here, and change this to block entries so we don't forget it later. This is also block entries. So we saved them all and renamed them so they are still working the same as before. And now we want to implement the paginate. As you remember, we have already done something similar in our user controller, but that's not so nice, so we will work through it. So once we have our paginate in our service here, and there we use the paginate from npm package, and this here is the npm package that we used and that we will still use. Let's go to the npm side. So here you can have like from this package the paginate, pagination, and pagination options. So you just use paginate here from this package. You say which entity, and you go for the repository that we injected here, like our repository, and then you can give some options. And the options are like limit, how many objects should be returned, which page should be returned, so we can look into this here. We have the pagination options, and so you have a limit, the amount of items to be requested per page, the page that is requested, and we have the route so it can add some links. So to show you, we can now simply do this, and as you remember here in our user controller, we did this in for one request, so just for this get, and then we were looking, is there a username here, a query or not? But we can now change this up into 2 requests in our block controller. So right now we are having here our get. Let's see, where are we? Find block entries. This is our old. We don't want this anymore. And now we want to have 2. So we can name the first, because we want to index everything and want to return all block entries. So we can make a simple get request. And then we have some query parameters. So the first one is page, and this is just a page, and this is from type number, and if nothing is specified, then this is 1. You can see it here in the documentation where it says if nothing specified, then we go for, I had some where it says 0, but 0 is wrong, because then, that's not how this typeorm works. You always need to go to page 1 to have results. I can show you later. So if nothing is specified in this request, then we will always return page 1. And then we can make another query, or another query parameter, and this is the limit one, and this is from type number, and if nothing is specified, then this should be 10. So we want 10 items on a page. So what we can do now, we can say limit is the limit and check if it is bigger than 100. And so if it is bigger, then we return 100, and if it's smaller, then we return limit. So if limit is bigger than 100, then return 100, else return the limit, so if we are smaller. And then we can just go for our blog service, and then we want to have like a function named paginateAll that we still have to develop or to write. And then we want to specify here the pagination options. So we can now go into our blog service, and here we have our find all, and now we want to paginate all. And this is of course also an observable, and this is from the type pagination, and this is from type BlogEntry. And what we need are the options, and these are the iPagination options. So here what we want to return is very simple. You can see it here. These are all from the nest.js-typeorm-paginate package, and pagination, you can see we have paginate, so we return items, metadata, links, everything we need. And so we can now simply say return. We want to make it an observable again, so we want to use paginate from this package. We return something from blog entry type, and then we give it our blog repository and our options. Let's see what's wrong here, so we need to close this. Our options that are specified. And we also want to have our relations, so we can make here another options object, or what we need to query the database. And here simply, as it says, we want to have relations, and we want to have the relations for author. So for the column that we are having in our model, in our entity here, the author, which is many-to-one to our user entity. Then we could map the outcome, or we could, actually could just let it be, but just for you to see, could say it's blog entries, and this is from type pagination, and this is a blog entry. And then we are just returning an observable blog entries. So what we need now, we have to specify some stuff here in our object, in our options. And these are the things that we need. We can see limit, page, and route. So limit is of course our limit. So we can just say we want to make it a number if it isn't one. We have a page. This is also our page. And then we can have a route, and I will show you now for what this is good. So if we start this again and go or query again this endpoint, then you see now we get return an object with items, all the blog entries, and then we have some metadata like total items in this table, items count that are on this page, items per page of maximum that we want to have, total pages and current page, so how many pages are there in total. And you see the links are completely empty because we have not specified a route here, like a base route that is added. And so what we want to have here, like our base route, is this. So if you have later like different stages, like test, develop, or production environment, then you need here 3 different links, and you have to set this up correctly. So if we query this now again, we should have the links here. You see first and last, because previous and next, there is no next page and there is no previous page. And so we could go for the first page, or we could go for the last page, and then you see it's adding automatically the parameters page 1 and limit 10 because there is just one page. So we can now save this request. Let's save it and say get block entries by user. And we save this to our blog. Where are we? YouTube blog. Just save it to here. And then we need another request. And this is also, it's very similar, so we can copy and paste a bit. So now we have a paginateByUser endpoint. So we can call this, let's copy and paste a bit. So we actually get there faster. And we can call indexByUser. So we want to query or return a pagination object with a user. And here we can simply say we go for the path user. And then we have like a parameter user. So we can add this to here and can just say now we're having a parameter. And this is our user. And then we can just call this user ID from type number here. And so we can go here, and now we want to call our blog service paginateByUser function that we have to define. And of course this is also BlogEntries, and to make it a little bit nicer we can say export const. We can name it like BlogEntries URL. Name it like this, copy this, and then we can paste it in for here, and we can paste it in for here, so we don't have to use it, write it twice. So we can go paginateByUser and go into our blog service and say paginateByUser. And this is like doing nearly the same stuff as before. So we could also copy and paste here a bit. And as you see, we also need our options. And what we need here in advance is our user ID so that we can query all the blog entries by this specific user that is provided, so by the ID. So as return, we want to return the same stuff as here, but with one bit difference. We are not just having the relations, but we are also adding a where clause. So we want to query against where, and so here we want to query against author, and this is of course the user ID that is provided, and then everything else stays the same. So now you see we are missing here another input, and so this is our user ID. And so of course if there is, so we do it like this, and then everything should be fine. So now we have here this endpoint, and then we can add like to the path the user. And if we then go for user and give him the parameter 7, then you see we are just getting returned one item with the user 7. And we can also go for the user 9. Then you see there are 2 items. They are always having the user 9. If we go for user 10, then you see there's nothing provided. So another thing that I just wanted to add here, in our user entity, our email should also be unique true, because I forgot it, I don't know why. So username and email should be unique. Okay, yeah, because that's my mistake, because I already have it, but I will make it later. Forget about this. So we can save it now. It should start fine. So to finish this up, we save this request here, API block entries, and we rename this. Let's say how to rename this. let's say get all blog entries paginated. And then we want to have another endpoint where we give him the user ID. And so we also save this to our collection, and we can name this get all blog entries by user ID. We save this, and then as always we export this and save it into our repository. So we have it here, and then we can check against our story. So what have we done here? So we have a new get endpoint for all blog entries. We have a new get endpoint to get all blog entries by user ID. And of course they are both pageable like here. So we can say done, done, and done. We have renamed our endpoint, and we have added everything to our Postman collection. So we can move this to done. We can close our story. So we can just say git-flow feature finish and merge it back into our develop branch. First, of course, we need to commit them and say video23 added pagination endpoints for getting all blog entries and getting all blog entries by a specific user. So now we can push this, and then we can say git-flow feature finish and merge this feature back into our develop branch. And as soon as this is done, we can now push it back into our GitLab remote repository. So we can just call git push,